So far, we've looked at how energy flows in ecosystems, and now we're going to look at the role that matter plays in ecosystems, because both energy and matter together provide sort of the raw materials that make an ecosystem function. Neither of them are living things, but they're two of the most important things that living things rely on. And basically, when we're talking about matter in ecosystems, we're talking about something called nutrient cycling. So matter in ecosystems is the actual raw material kind of chemicals that help build up the main components of ecosystems, which are mostly living organisms. So when we talk about nutrient cycling, we're talking about the cycling of kind of the big four honk: hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon, and how those things flow from one organism to the next, how they flow out of living organisms into abiotic aspects of the ecosystem, and then how they flow back into biotic aspects of the ecosystem. So those are kind of our major ones. And then phosphorus and sulfur also, and any other type of nutrient that you find in the body, basically moves through nutrient cycling in the ecosystem. But as far as the big and main ones to focus on, we're going to focus on the nitrogen cycle, the carbon cycle, the H and O, hydrogen and oxygen, actually cycle together as H2O, which is water. So we'll talk about the water cycle, and we'll look a little bit at the phosphorus cycle, although we won't look much at the sulfur cycle. So unlike energy from the sun, matter is not constantly being resupplied on planet Earth. Energy from the sun is always kind of bombarding the Earth, at least 50% of the Earth at a time about, and matter is not constantly being resupplied. Every once in a while, we get hit by an asteroid or a meteorite. Technically, that drops a little bit of extra matter on the planet, but it's nothing like the amount of energy that we get from the sun on a constant input of energy from the sun. So because matter is not really being added into our ecosystems, we would pretty quickly run out of raw materials to build living organisms. And so the nutrients like carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen, those nutrients have to be able to cycle and recycle through ecosystems. And like I said, in and out of living and non-living parts of the ecosystem. They follow the basic rule called the law of conservation of matter. And this is more of a physics rule, but it governs a lot of important things about how matter interacts with living things. The law of conservation of matter, you probably learned about in middle school, just says that matter can't be created or destroyed. I can't just make a carbon atom. The carbon that's here is the carbon that's here is the carbon that's always been here, and it never goes anywhere. It just moves, at least it doesn't go anywhere off the planet, but it moves constantly through different parts of the planet through nutrient cycling. Same thing with all the nitrogen and the water and the oxygen. So we have a finite, limited supply of all of those things, but because things cycle so efficiently, we do manage to move all of those important nutrients around through ecosystems pretty well. That's in contrast, like I said, to energy from the sun, which we learned a little bit about yesterday. And energy from the sun flows into ecosystems from the sun, flows through ecosystems, and energy follows the law of conservation of energy, which says energy can't be created or destroyed, but energy can be degraded into heat, which is not a usable form of energy for ecosystems, and which is one of the reasons that it's so important for us to keep getting that constant energy supply from the sun. So in an ecosystem, nutrient cycling is part of what's called a biogeochemical cycle. It sounds really fancy and really long, but if you really break the word down, bio, that's like this class, biology, it means life. And geo, that's a lot of stuff you learned about last year. You learned a lot of geology last year, which is the study of rocks and the earth and how rocks and the rock cycle and earth work. And then chemical, that's hopefully what you're either taking now or will take next year, chemistry, which is more about the individual like atoms and molecules that make up living things and non-living things on the planet. So it's really just about how things move through the bio part of the cycle, that's the living organisms on the planet, and then the geochemical part of a cycle are the non-living things on the planet. So a nutrient cycle through the living and the non-living parts, that's called a biogeochemical cycle.